Welcome back to my channel where I bring you new videos every week on all aspects of the past. Today we're exploring the shocking consummation of Lucrezia Borgia, the most scandalous wedding of the Renaissance. But how did this most scandalous wedding come to be? What was so shocking about it? And what happened next? Well, let's get into it. Lucrezia Borgia was born on April 18th, 1480 in the Vatican. She was the only child of the infamous Pope Alexander VI and his second wife, Sanzia de Aragon. Her father had become pope just 2 months before her birth after serving as a cardinal for nearly 20 years. He was already a controversial figure, having once been sentenced to death by a church tribunal for simony, which is buying or selling of spiritual things like holy relics or indulgences. He'd gotten away with that, though, and went on to become one of the wealthiest popes in history. Lucrezia's mother was the daughter of King Ferdinand I of Naples and Isabella of Chiava, making Lucrezia a first cousin twice removed of the future Queen Isabella of England, wife of Henry VIII. Unfortunately, her mother died when she was just 13 years old, leading to speculation that Pope Alexander may have actually poisoned her, perhaps to marry off his young daughter to a suitable suitor as soon as possible. Lucrezia's father's enemies, including the Medici family, saw the opportunity to damage his reputation and advance their own interests by attempting to ruin his daughter's reputation and marring her prospects. Rumors began to spread that at her christening party, Lucrezia had prostituted herself in taverns and brothels. Although these rumors were likely false, they would stick to her throughout her life. Still, she was considered a prize to be had by many powerful men. The man who got her hand in marriage was the Marquis of Ferrara, a 27-year-old Italian nobleman named Alfonso d'Este. He was handsome, wealthy, and powerful. There was just one problem. He was already married to a woman named Isabella of the Italian noble house of Sanseverino. Alfonso was, in fact, getting a divorce from Isabella so he could marry Lucrezia. The divorce was granted in January 1493, and 6 days later, on January 29th, 1493, Lucrezia and Alfonso were married in the Vatican. It was a lavish affair with 500 guests in attendance. Many powerful people were there, including members of the French and Holy Roman royal families. The wedding night was not to be. However, the bride and groom didn't sleep together on their wedding night. Instead, Lucrezia spent the evening with her ladies-in-waiting while her father and her brother entertained male guests. That wasn't unusual. In fact, it was common practice for young brides to wait a few days before being taken to their husband's bed. In fact, it was 4 days later on February 2nd that the bride and groom finally consummated their marriage. How do we know this? Because on that day, Lucrezia became sick and spent much of the night vomiting and having diarrhea. Her lady-in-waiting recorded in a letter that her mistress had not been feeling well since her wedding night, but seemed fine during the day, only to feel sick again in the evening. This happened every night. What could have made her so sick? Well, historians speculate that she was probably suffering from food poisoning. This was not uncommon back then, especially among young women. The most common cause was eating something that had been left out too long, such as meat, fish, or fruit. It was also possible that someone had put something in her food or drink that was meant to make her ill. Back then, if you wanted to break up a wedding night, that was a pretty common way of doing it. Unfortunately, Lucrezia's wedding night wouldn't just be memorable because of food poisoning. As she lay sick in her bed, her father, Pope Alexander, was dying. He had been ill for some time with what might have been stomach cancer, although some historians think he was poisoned by a rival. When he learned that his daughter had finally been taken to her husband's bed, he summoned her to his bedside. He told her that he had never loved anything more than her and instructed her to take care of her brother. Then he died on August 18th, 1492, just 4 months after walking his daughter down the aisle. This created a bit of a problem for Lucrezia. See, when her father died, she inherited his title as head of the Borgia family as well as his wealth. The problem was that her husband's family, the S family, had always considered themselves to be higher status than the Borgias. They were a much older and more established noble family than the Borgias. So now Alfonso's mother, the Marchesa de Ferrara, didn't want him to be married to someone of lower status than him. She demanded an annulment. Marchesa Isabella, Alfonso's former wife, was also demanding an annulment. Why? Because even though Alfonso and Lucrezia had only been married for 3 months, she had still slept with him on their wedding night. But Lucrezia wasn't backing down. She didn't want an annulment. She wanted to stay married to Alfonso. She knew that her father had set up this marriage to protect her and her brother from those who would seek to harm them now that he was dead, and she was right to be worried. Just weeks after her father's death, she received an anonymous letter telling her to leave Ferrara immediately or she would die. It seems likely that her father's enemies were already trying to get rid of her. By marrying her off to Alfonso, he had created a very powerful ally for her and her brother. She was now related to the S family and the Sanseverino family, and both of these families were extremely powerful. She refused to annul her marriage to Alfonso, and the case went to Rome to be heard by none other than her uncle, Pope Alexander's successor, Pope Pius III. He ruled that the marriage was valid. However, he stipulated that Lucrezia and Alfonso must live separately unless they wanted to be excommunicated. As you can imagine, this ruling infuriated the Este family, who had considerable power in Rome. The city was in an uproar, and Alfonso's mother, Marchesa Isabella, took matters into her own hands. She sent assassins to murder Alfonso's counselor, Monsignor di Canola. They also attempted to assassinate Cardinal del Molino, who was a close friend of the young Borgia. The plotters were caught, though, and executed, but it wasn't over yet. On May 30th, 1496, while Lucrezia was visiting the monastery of San Damiano, assassins entered the building and shot her in the face and chest with a crossbow. The bolts missed her vital organs, though, and she survived the attempt on her life. She spent 5 months recovering, but the shooting left her permanently disfigured and with partial paralysis on her right side. Her uncle, Pope Pius III, died in October 1497, and the new pope, who had previously been Cardinal della Rovere, became Pope Julius II. He wasted no time in putting the would-be assassins to death and taking measures to punish the real mastermind behind the plot. Alfonso's mother, Isabella. She was forced to flee Rome. She was later arrested and imprisoned in a castle in Orvieto, where she died in 1507. It seemed that justice had finally been done. Lucrezia and Alfonso were finally able to consummate their marriage without fear of interference, but their story doesn't end there. In fact, they ended up consummating their marriage not just once, not just twice, but 3 times in one night. Wait, what? How is this even possible? We'll tell you right after. While Lucrezia recovered from her assassination attempt, her husband, Alfonso, had been in France visiting his friend, King Charles VIII. Charles needed help with a problem he had. His sister, Princess Anne, had become engaged to the Duke of Calabria, the heir to the throne of Naples. But the princess had recently had an altercation with her suitor's mother, the Duchess of Calabria, and now she didn't want to marry him anymore. Charles needed his sister to marry the Duke of Calabria so that he could secure the alliance with Naples. So he asked Alfonso for help. Alfonso, who was a friend of Anne's, agreed to come to France and try to persuade her to go through with the marriage. Once there, however, Alfonso fell madly in love with the princess. He broke off his engagement to Lucrezia in order to marry Anne. And what did Lucrezia do? She sued for annulment once again, claiming that Alfonso had abandoned her. Pope Julius II granted her an annulment on the grounds of consanguinity. However, he later had second thoughts and tried to retract his decision. When he died in 1513, though, the annulment stood. Lucrezia was free to marry again. Less than a year later, she married the future Grand Duke of Florence, and they had 7 children together. What about Alfonso? After marrying Anne, he gave up his claim to Ferrara and instead ruled the Duchy of Bisaccia. He and Anne had 8 children together. So in the end, the most scandalous wedding of the Renaissance resulted in not 1, not 2, but 3 marriages. Thank you so much for watching. Which character in this story surprised you the most? Let me know in the comments. And while you're there, please remember to subscribe so you never miss any of my new videos. I'll see you next time.